The following is from the 1979 book Broca's Brain, Reflections on the Romance of Science by the great Carl Sagan. This is from chapter 20 of that book, In Defense of Robots. Thou comest in such a questionable shape that I will speak to thee. Hamlet, Act 1, Scene 4, William Shakespeare. The word robot, first introduced by the Czech writer Karel Čapek, is derived from the Slavic root for worker, but it signifies a machine rather than a human worker. Robots, especially robots in space, have often received derogatory notices in the press. We read that a human being was necessary to make the terminal landing adjustments on Apollo 11, without which the first manned lunar landing would have ended in disaster. That a mobile robot on the Martian surface could never be as clever as astronauts in selecting samples to be returned to Earthbound geologists. That machines could never have repaired as men did the Skylab sunshade, so vital for the continuance of the Skylab mission. But all of these comparisons turn out, naturally enough, to have been written by humans. I wonder if a small self-congratulatory element, a whiff of human chauvinism, has not crept into these judgments. Just as whites can sometimes detect racism, and men can occasionally discern sexism, I wonder whether we cannot here glimpse some comparable affliction of the human spirit, a disease that as yet has no name. The word anthropocentrism does not quite mean the same thing. The word humanism has been preempted by other and more benign activities of our kind. From the analogy with sexism and racism, I suppose the name for this malady is speciesism, the prejudice that there are no beings so fine, so capable, so reliable as human beings. This is a prejudice because it is, at the very least, a prejudgment, a conclusion drawn before all the facts are in. Such comparisons of men and machines in space are comparisons of smart men and dumb machines. We have not asked what sorts of machines could have been built for the $30 or so billion that the Apollo and Skylab missions cost. Each human being is a superbly constructed, astonishingly compact, self-ambulatory computer, capable on occasion of independent decision-making and real control of his or her environment. And, as the old joke goes, these computers can be constructed by unskilled labor. But there are serious limitations to employing human beings in certain environments. Without a great deal of protection, human beings would be inconvenienced on the ocean floor, the surface of Venus, the deep interior of Jupiter, or even on long space missions. Perhaps the only interesting results of Skylab that could not have been obtained by machines is that human beings in space for a period of months undergo a serious loss of bone calcium and phosphorus, which seems to imply that human beings may be incapacitated under 0G for missions of 6 to 9 months or longer. But the minimum interplanetary voyages have characteristic times of a year or two. Because we value human beings highly, we are reluctant to send them on very risky missions. If we do send human beings to exotic environments, we must also send along their food, their air, their water, amenities for entertainment and waste cycling, and their companions. By comparison, machines require no elaborate life support systems, no entertainment, no companionship, and we do not yet feel any strong ethical prohibitions against sending machines on one-way or suicide missions. Certainly, for simple missions, machines have proved themselves many times over. Unmanned missions have performed the first photography of the whole Earth and of the far side of the Moon, the first landings on the Moon, Mars, and Venus, and the first thorough orbital reconnaissance of another planet in the Mariner 9 and Viking missions to Mars. Here on Earth, it is increasingly common for high-technology manufacturing, for example, chemical and pharmaceutical plants, to be performed largely or entirely under computer control. In all these activities, machines are able, to some extent, to sense errors, to correct mistakes, to alert human controllers some great distance away about perceived problems. The powerful abilities of computing machines to do arithmetic hundreds of millions of times faster than unaided human beings are legendary. But what about really difficult matters? Can machines in any sense think through a new problem? Can they make discussions of the branch contingency tree variety with which we think of as characteristically human? That is, I ask question 1. If the answer is A, I ask question 2. But if the answer is B, I ask question 3, and so on. Some decades ago, the English mathematician A.M. Turing described what would be necessary for him to believe in machine intelligence. The condition was simply that he could be in teletype communication with a machine and be unable to tell whether or not it was a human being. Turing imagined a conversation between a man and a machine of the following quality. Interrogator. In the first line of your sonnet, which reads, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day, would not a spring day do as well or better?" Witness. It wouldn't scan. Interrogator. How about a winter's day? That would scan all right. Witness. Yes, but no one wants to be compared to a winter's day. Interrogator. Would you say Mr. Pickwick reminds you of Christmas? Witness. In a way. Interrogator. Yet, Christmas is a winter's day, and I do not think Mr. Pickwick would mind the comparison. Witness. I don't think you're serious. By winter's day, one means a typical winter's day, rather than a special one like Christmas. As another example, a machine psychiatrist has been developed by Joseph Weizenbaum, also at MIT. This is a much simpler program than Winograd's, since it involves non-directive psychotherapy, which, generally speaking, requires extremely simple-minded computer programs. Here is a striking dialogue between a human being and a computer psychotherapist. Note: there is certainly a selection effect here. Many other machine-human psychiatric dialogues are not nearly so striking, but I suppose most human-human psychiatric dialogues are not so very striking either. In this interaction, in order to spell out clearly the respective roles of therapist and patient, computer therapist will be in a computer voice, while the patient will be in a normal voice. Men are all alike. In what way? They're always bugging us about something or other. Can you think of a specific example? Well, my boyfriend made me come here. Your boyfriend made you come here. He noticed that I'm depressed much of the time. I'm sorry to hear that you are depressed. He's right. I am unhappy. Do you think coming here will help you not be unhappy? I need some help. That much is clear. What would it mean to you if you got some help? Perhaps I could learn to get along with my mother. Tell me more about your family. My mother takes care of me. Who else in your family takes care of you? My father. Your father? You are like my father in some ways. What resemblance do you see? You are not very aggressive, but I don't think you want me to notice that. What makes you think that I am not very aggressive? You don't argue with me. Why don't you think I argue with you? You are afraid of me. Does it please you to believe I am afraid of you? It pleases my father to think I'm afraid of him. What else comes to mind when you think of your father? Bullies. Does that have anything to do with the fact that your boyfriend made you come here? This astonishing, one is very tempted to say, perceptive response from the computer is, of course, pre-programmed. But then, so are responses of human psychotherapists. In a time when more and more people in our society seem to be in need of psychiatric counseling, and when time-sharing of computers is widespread, I can even imagine the development of a network of computer psychotherapeutic terminals, something like arrays of large telephone booths, in which, for a few dollars a session, we are able to talk to an attentive, tested, and largely non-directive psychotherapist. Ensuring the confidentiality of the psychiatric dialogue is one of the several important steps still to be worked out. Another sign of the intellectual accomplishments of machines is in games. Even exceptionally simple computers, those that can be wired by a bright 10-year-old, can be programmed to play perfect tic-tac-toe. Some computers can play world-class checkers. Chess is, of course, a much more complicated game than tic-tac-toe or checkers. Here, programming a machine to win is more difficult, and novel strategies have been used, including several rather successful attempts to have a computer learn from its own experience in playing previous chess games. Computers can learn, for example, empirically the rule that it is better in the beginning of the game to control the center of the chessboard than the periphery. The 10 best chess players in the world still have nothing to fear from any present computer, but the situation is changing. Recently, a computer for the first time did well enough to enter the Minnesota State Chess Open. This may be the first time that a non-human has entered a major sporting event on the planet Earth. I cannot help but wonder if robot golfers and designated hitters may be attempted sometime in the next decade, to say nothing of dolphins in freestyle competition. The computer did not win the Chess Open, but this is the first time one has done well enough to enter such a competition. Chess-playing computers are improving extremely rapidly. I've heard machines demean, often with a just audible sigh of relief, for the fact that chess is an area where human beings are still superior. This reminds me very much of the old joke in which a stranger remarks with wonder on the accomplishments of a checker-playing dog. The dog's owner replies, "Oh, it's not all that remarkable. He loses 2 games out of 3. A machine that plays chess in the middle range of human expertise is a very capable machine. Even if there are thousands of human chess players who play better, there are millions who play worse. To play chess requires strategy, foresight, analytical powers, and the ability to cross-correlate large numbers of variables, and to learn from experience. These are excellent qualities in those whose job it is to discover and explore, as well as those who watch the baby and walk the dog. With this as a more or less representative set of examples of the state of development of machine intelligence, I think it is clear that a major effort over the next decade could produce much more sophisticated examples. This is also the opinion of most workers in machine intelligence. In thinking about this next generation of machine intelligence, it is important to distinguish between self-controlled and remotely controlled robots. A self-controlled robot has intelligence within it. A remotely controlled robot has its intelligence in some other place, and its successful operation depends upon close communication between its central computer and itself. There are, of course, intermediate cases where the machine may be partly self-activated and partly remotely controlled. This is a mix of remote and in-situ control that seems to offer the highest efficiency for the near future. For example, we can imagine a machine designed for the mining of the ocean floor. There are enormous quantities of manganese nodules littering the abyssal depths. They were once thought to have been produced by meteorite infall on Earth, but are now believed to be formed occasionally in vast manganese fountains produced by the internal tectonic activity of the Earth. Many other scarce and industrially valuable minerals are likewise to be found on the deep ocean bottom. We have the capability today to design devices that can systematically swim over or crawl upon the ocean floor, that are able to perform spectrometric or other chemical examinations on the surface material, that can automatically radio back to ship or land all findings, and that can mark the locales of especially valuable deposits, for example, by low-frequency radio homing devices. The radio beacon will then direct great mining machines to the appropriate locales. The present state-of-the-art in deep-sea submersibles and in spacecraft environmental sensors is clearly compatible with the development of such devices. Similar remarks can be made for offshore oil drilling, for coal and other subterranean mineral mining, and so on. The likely economic returns from such devices would pay not only for their development, but for the entire space program many times over. When the machines are faced with particularly difficult situations, they can be programmed to recognize that the situations are beyond their abilities and to inquire of human operators working in safe and pleasant environments what to do next. The examples just given are of devices that are largely self-controlled. The reverse is also possible, and a great deal of preliminary work along those lines has been performed in the remote handling of highly radioactive materials in the laboratories of the U.S. Department of Energy. Here, I imagine a human being who is connected by radio link with a mobile machine. The operator is in Manila, say, and the machine is in the Mindanao Deep. The operator is attached to an array of electronic relays, which transmits and amplifies his movements to the machine and which can, conversely, carry what the machine finds back to his senses. So when the operator turns his head to the left, the television cameras on the machine turn to the left, and the operator sees on a great hemispherical television screen around him the scene the machine's searchlights and cameras have revealed. When the operator in Manila takes a few strides forward in his wired suit, the machine in the abysmal depths ambles a few feet forward. When the operator reaches out his hand, the mechanical arm of the machine likewise extends itself, and the precision of the man-machine interaction is such that precise manipulation of material at the ocean bottom by the machine's fingers is possible. With such devices, human beings can enter environments otherwise closed to them forever. In the exploration of Mars, unmanned vehicles have already soft-landed, and only a little further in the future they will roam about the surface of the red planet as some now do on the moon. We are not yet ready for a manned mission to Mars. Some of us are concerned about such missions because of the dangers of carrying terrestrial microbes to Mars, and Martian microbes if they exist to Earth, but also because of their enormous expense. The Viking landers deposited on Mars in summer of 1976 have a very interesting array of sensors and scientific instruments, which are the extension of human senses to an alien environment. The obvious post-Viking device for Martian exploration, one which takes advantage of the Viking technology, is a Viking rover in which the equivalent of an entire Viking spacecraft, but with considerably improved science, is put on wheels or tractor treads and permitted to rove slowly over the Martian landscape. But now we have a new problem, one that is never encountered in machine operation on the Earth's surface. Although Mars is the second closest planet, it is so far from the Earth that light travel becomes significant. At a typical relative position of Mars and the Earth, the planet is 20 light minutes away. Thus, if the spacecraft were confronted with a steep incline, it might send a message of inquiry back to Earth. 40 minutes later, the response would arrive saying something like, "For heaven's sake, stand dead still!" But by then, of course, an unsophisticated machine would have tumbled into a gully. Consequently, any Martian rover requires slope and roughness sensors. Fortunately, these are readily available and are even seen in some children's toys. When confronted with a precipitous slope or large boulder, the spacecraft would either stop until receiving instructions from the Earth in response to its query and televised picture of the terrain, or back off and start in another and safer direction. Much more elaborate contingency decision networks can be built into the onboard computers of spacecraft of the 1980s. For more remote objectives, and to be explored further in the future, we can imagine human controllers in orbit around the target planet or on one of its moons. In the exploration of Jupiter, for example, I can imagine the operators on a small moon outside the fierce Jovian radiation belts, controlling with only a few seconds delay the responses of a spacecraft floating in the dense Jovian clouds. Human beings on Earth can also be in such an interaction loop if they are willing to spend such time on the Enterprise. If every decision in Martian exploration must be fed through a human controller on Earth, the rover can only traverse a few feet an hour, but the lifetimes of such rovers are so long that a few feet an hour represents a perfectly respectable rate of progress. However, as we imagine expeditions into the farthest reaches of the solar system and ultimately to the stars, it is clear that self-controlled machine intelligence will assume heavier burdens of the responsibility. In the development of such machines, we find a kind of convergent evolution. Viking is, in a curious sense, like some great outsized clumsily constructed insect. It is not yet ambulatory, and it is certainly incapable of self-reproduction, but it has an exoskeleton, it has a wide range of insect-like sensory organs, and it is about as intelligent as a dragonfly. But Viking has some advantages that insects do not. It can, on occasion, by inquiring of its controllers on Earth, assume the intelligence of a human being. The controllers are able to reprogram the Viking computer on the basis of the decisions they make. As the field of machine intelligence advances, and as increasingly distant objects in the solar system become accessible to exploration, we will see the development of increasingly sophisticated onboard computers, slowly climbing the phylogenetic tree from insect intelligence to crocodile intelligence, to squirrel intelligence, and, in the not very remote future, I think, to dog intelligence. Any flight to the outer solar system must have a computer capable of determining whether it is working properly. There is no possibility of sending to the Earth for a repairman. The machine must be able to sense when it is sick and skillfully doctor its own illnesses. A computer is needed that is able to either fix or replace failed computer, sensor, or structural components. Such a computer, which has been called STAR, Self-Testing and Repairing Computer, is on the threshold of development. It employs redundant components as biology does. We have 2 lungs and 2 kidneys partly because each is the protection against failure of the other. But a computer can be much more redundant than a human being who has, for example, but 1 head and 1 heart. Because of the weight premium on deep space exploratory ventures, there will be strong pressures for continued miniaturization of intelligent machines. It is clear that remarkable miniaturization has already occurred. Vacuum tubes have been replaced by transistors, wired circuits by printed circuit boards, and entire computer systems by silicon chip microcircuitry. Today, a circuit that used to occupy much of a 1930 radio set can be printed on the tip of a pen. If intelligent machines for terrestrial mining and space exploratory applications are pursued, the time cannot be far off when household and other domestic robots will become commercially feasible. Unlike the classical anthropoid robots of science fiction, there is no reason for such machines to look any more human than a vacuum cleaner does. They will be specialized for their functions. But there are many common tasks, ranging from bartending to floor washing, that involve a very limited array of intellectual capabilities, albeit substantial stamina and patience. All-purpose ambulatory household robots, which perform domestic functions as well as a proper 19th century butler, are probably many decades off. But more specialized machines, each adapted to specific household functions, are probably already on the horizon. It is possible to imagine many other civic tasks and essential functions of everyday life carried out by intelligent machines. By the early 1970s, garbage collectors in Anchorage, Alaska, and other cities won wage settlements guaranteeing them salaries of about $20,000 per annum. It is possible that the economic pressures alone may make a persuasive case for the development of automated garbage collecting machines. For the development of domestic and civic robots to be a general civic good, the effective re-employment of those human beings displaced by the robots must be, of course, arranged. But over a human generation, that should not be too difficult, particularly if there are enlightened educational reforms. Human beings enjoy learning. We appear to be on the verge of developing a wide variety of intelligent machines capable of performing tasks too dangerous, too expensive, too onerous, or too boring for human beings. The development of such machines is, in my mind, one of the few legitimate spin-offs of the space program. The efficient exploitation of energy in agriculture, upon which our survival as a species depends, may even be contingent on the development of such machines. The main obstacle seems to be a very human problem, the quiet feeling that comes stealthily and unbidden, and argues that there is something threatening or inhuman about machines performing tasks as well or better than human beings. or a sense of loathing for creatures made of silicon and germanium rather than proteins and nucleic acids. But in many respects, our survival as a species depends on our transcending such primitive chauvinisms. In part, our adjustment to intelligent machines is a matter of acclimatization. There are already cardiac pacemakers that can sense the beat of a human heart. Only when there is the slightest hint of fibrillation does the pacemaker stimulate the heart. This is a mild but very useful sort of machine intelligence. I cannot imagine the wearer of this device resenting its intelligence. I think in a relatively short period of time, there will be a very similar sort of acceptance for much more intelligent and sophisticated machines. There is nothing inhuman about an intelligent machine. It is indeed an expression of those superb intellectual qualities that only human beings, of all creatures on this planet, now possess. This was Chapter 20 of the 1979 book, Broca's Brain, Reflections on the Romance of Science, by the great Carl Sagan. The chapter was titled, In Defense of Robots. And now the only non-vulgar outtake. They will roam about the surface of the red planet as some now do on Moon.